I found the journal inside one of my grandmother's boxes, 3 weeks after she passed. No one in the family knew it existed. The cover was brown leather, the small brass lock rusted through, and when I opened it, the smell of old paper hit me like the smell of a room no one had entered in years. My name is Claire. I was 25 years old and my grandmother, Margaret, had been the only family I had left in the world, or used to have. I sat down on the floor of the storage room, surrounded by cardboard boxes and the smell of mothballs, and I began to read. The early pages were ordinary. She wrote about daily life, grocery shopping, the weather, the neighbors. Her handwriting was neat and consistent, slanting slightly to the right the way people of her generation wrote. I flipped through quickly, smiling to myself when I found passages where she complained about my grandfather forgetting everything, about how my mother had been a crybaby as a child. Then I reached the entry dated March 14th, the year before I was born. The handwriting changed. It was no longer neat. The letters were shaky and uneven, as though the hand holding the pen had been trembling. And the content made me read it 3 times before I trusted my own understanding. She had written, "It was standing at the foot of my bed again. The 12th night. I don't look directly at its face anymore because the last time I did, I couldn't sleep for a week. I closed my eyes and counted to 100. When I opened them, it was still there. It never speaks. It only stands. And every night, it stands a little closer than before." I closed the journal. I sat in the storage room for a long time, listening to the wind push through the gaps in the door, listening to the cardboard boxes shift against each other. Then I opened it again and kept reading. My grandmother had been seeing this thing for 19 years. From when she was 40 years old until she was 59, when the entries abruptly stopped. Not at the end of a page but in the middle of a sentence. As though something had caused her to set down the pen and never pick it up again. The entries told a fragmented story, pieced together across years. There were stretches where she didn't see it for months. The journal returning to its ordinary voice, grocery shopping, the weather, and then suddenly, without explanation, a single line would appear, "Last night it came back." No context. No commentary. As though she had accepted that this was simply a part of her life, and her only responsibility was to record it. What she described never changed. A figure standing at the foot of her bed. Silent. Mostly still. Only watching. But there was one detail she returned to again and again like an obsession. Each time it appeared, it stood a little closer than the time before. Not much. Just slightly. Just enough that she could tell. In one entry she wrote, "I've calculated it. If the distance keeps shrinking the way it has, then someday it will be standing right beside my bed." I don't allow myself to think about what happens after that. I finished reading close to midnight. I closed the journal, put it back in its box, sealed the box, and carried everything into my grandmother's bedroom because that was the only room still lit. I didn't want to be alone in that dark storage room any longer. That night I slept over in her house, on the small sofa in the living room where I used to lie as a child watching cartoons. I left every light on. I held my phone in both hands and tried to sleep. I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a sound from my grandmother's bedroom. Something faint. Like footsteps on the wooden floor. One step, then a pause. One step, then a pause. Moving so slowly that I couldn't be certain I was hearing it at all. I lay still on the sofa. I looked toward the dark hallway. The door to my grandmother's bedroom was slightly ajar, and through the gap there was nothing but darkness. Then the footsteps stopped. I held my breath. And in that dark gap of the doorway I saw the shadow of someone standing. I shot upright, switched on the hallway light and pushed open the bedroom door. The room was empty. No one there. The street light outside cast pale shapes across the cardboard boxes stacked against the walls, the bed stripped bare where my grandmother used to sleep, and the air in the room was noticeably colder than the rest of the house, cold enough that I could see my own breath. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Then I turned around, pulled the door shut, and sat in the middle of the living room with every light blazing until morning came. The next day I brought the journal to Aunt Ruth, my grandmother Margaret's younger sister. She was the only surviving member of that generation of my family. She was 81 years old, living in a care home on the edge of the city, and when I set the journal on the table in front of her, I watched her hands begin to tremble. "You know about this," she said. Not a question. She told me everything. Her voice was calm in a way that felt strange, the way someone sounds when they have held a secret for so long it no longer has weight. Margaret had not been the first. Her mother, my great-grandmother, had seen it too, and her mother before that. It followed the bloodline, passing from one generation to the next, always going to the oldest living woman in the family. When that woman died, it moved on to the next. "Margaret passed 3 weeks ago," I said slowly. Aunt Ruth looked at me. "Yes," she said. "But I'm 81. I'm not the one it's coming to next." I understood what she meant before she said it. "Claire," she said, her voice soft as wind, "you are the oldest living woman in this family now. You're 25 years old, but you're the only one left." I sat very still. "Has it started yet?" she asked. I thought about the shadow standing in the gap of the doorway the night before. The footsteps stopping in the dark room. The cold that had no reason to be there. I didn't answer Aunt Ruth. But that evening when I went home and walked into my bedroom, I looked toward the foot of my bed. And I finally understood why my grandmother had never described its face. Because when I looked at its face, I recognized it immediately. It was my face. Older. Hollowed out. With the empty eyes of someone who no longer existed on this side of the world. But my face. And it stood there at the foot of my bed looking at me, roughly 2 meters away. I remembered what my grandmother had written. "Every night it stands a little closer." I closed my eyes. I counted to 100. When I opened them, it was closer.